I spoke this morning at 8:30 to Davis County middle school students, 8th graders, for 2 hours. Wow. And then in the afternoon, for a little over an hour at Owensboro Middle School. And there were 350 kids in the auditorium. I tell you, they went wild, you know. They really did. I felt like, you know, like a rock star. Oh, gosh. A fella came over to me, a young fella, in the morning session, came over to me and he said, "You know, you're funny." And I said, "It's important to have humor." And I'm glad that I've watched enough talk shows at nighttime, Stephen Colbert and Jon Stewart and Jimmy Fallon, to pick up some of those pointers. Well, I watch television a lot. Not a lot, but I watch the news. I'm a former journalist. I was a newspaper reporter in New Haven, Connecticut for a while. And before I came to Kentucky 24 years ago with my wife and now 27-year-old son. And I learned a lot about talking to kids. I talk to adults also. And this is, I think, one of the biggest crowds I've ever seen. You all do me honor, and I thank you for that. I was just saying, I watch the news, and I look at these people crossing borders with packs of clothes on their back, dragging children, being pushed back by the police. And I see myself in there as a refugee running from the Nazis for so many years, escaping, being in an internment camp that transported Jews to Auschwitz. And I look at these migrants today, and I just hope that they don't suffer the same fate that my people did in World War II. I don't think they will, because I don't think the world will allow that to happen again. We had happy times before the war started. This is my family. My dad was taking the picture, of course, but that's my big brother Sammy. He was 16 years old then, 1940. My mom Nasha, she was 37 years old. My brother Leo, 11, and this little kid is me. In 1939, I was 3 years old. It was taken in the summer of '39. We were on vacation, having a good time. My dad, he loved to gamble, and here he is with his wife, and hardly ever put on a bathing suit because there was a nice casino around the block. But you know, it paid off at the end, and you'll understand. Here's a photograph of my dad. That's me, and that's my mom. We all dressed quite well. I was my mom's little prince. And it was taken, I really believe it was taken during Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. We were all dressed nicely, going to the synagogue or coming from the synagogue and celebrating the Jewish New Year. 10 days later was the Day of Atonement, when we Jewish people asked God to forgive us for sinning against God. If we sinned against a person, God would not accept that. He would say, you have to go to that person and ask for forgiveness. I get a lot of questions about forgiveness. And it's very difficult for me to answer that. Do I forgive? Do I believe in God? And the answer sometimes, depends upon the mood I'm in. If I see something that, is disturbing to me, that was related to the Holocaust, there are times I get angry, and get angry at God. What did you do? Why weren't you here to help us? And it's not the right thing to say, I know. Especially knowing that there were Jews who were walking to the gas chambers and they were praying to God. They were saying the Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. There is one God, blessed be He. And I was amazed when I read about those incidences. And I said, then who am I then to question God? Here are these folks knew that death was coming in minutes, and they still believed in God. Amazing. So how can I not believe in God? If I didn't, I would betray all these people. It would be a betrayal on my part. So I do believe in God, and I believe that He may have been instrumental in saving our lives. Right, Leslie? We had dinner last night, and we talked about that. And maybe that's why I'm here. Maybe I was chosen to tell the story. Who knows, huh? And I've told the story countless times in the past 25 years now. Started in 1992. Almost 25 years. To thousands of people. And I continue to do so, especially to young people, because I feel maybe I can make a difference in their lives. They see so many terrible things happening, and they get discouraged about what's going on. My son, 27 years old, he bemoans the fact that there is so much misery in this world. And I try to lift him up, and I try to lift the students up. And I tell them, you listen to my story, it's a story of hope. And they get it, you know, they get it. So here we are, Rosh Hashanah. A picture of going to the synagogue to pray for God, to pray for His forgiveness. And here is my mama. We used to take walks on the main avenue of Antwerp, where I was born. And, I mean, look at that little coat, that little man there, huh? You know those photographs, and they were all left behind when we had to flee in the apartment that we lived in Antwerp. And the neighbors, they held it for us. Is that something? And there were many pictures. And I was so overwhelmed by that. Because pictures are important to me. Newspaper reporter, he likes pictures. And I think here in this photograph, I got my first haircut. Because here is the barber shop. Coiffeur, hairdresser. Jewish boys didn't get their haircuts until, a little after 2 years old. I still don't know why. I don't. So there are pictures of me with really long hair. And then, of course, in the 1960s, when I wore bell-bottom pants and all that, I had long hair too. But this time I also had a beard. Oh, God. So this is a map of my journey. It started May 10, 1940. The Germans invaded Belgium, and they also invaded Holland and Luxembourg. We were defenseless. The bombs kept falling in Antwerp and Brussels. The troops hadn't come yet, but they were on their way. And my mom was frightened by the Germans. She had experiences in earlier years when she lived with her husband, with Max, in Germany, in Frankfurt, when Hitler came to rise, 1923. At that time, she said to my father, "We have to leave, Max, we have to leave, we can't stay here." And he agreed. And they took off for Belgium in 1924 with a 3-month-old baby, my brother Sam, who's 91 now. Going to be 92 in a few months. I'm 78, and I'm going to be 79 October 8th. Might as well tell you. My brother Leo, he passed away in 2003 from cancer, and he was 74 years old. So we stayed in our apartment for 3 days before we could get a taxi and get out of there. The German troops were closing in on Antwerp and Brussels. And people were leaving by the thousands. We didn't have a car. My dad didn't have a car. My mom got angry at him because we didn't have a car. That's why we had to wait to get a taxi 3 days later. And left everything behind. The photographs, took a few suitcases, some warm clothes, and that was it. We told the neighbors to watch for our furniture, because we told them we'll be back right away. Mhm. Never came back until after the war. So, took a taxi, and we went to this area right here where we had been vacationing along the coast. Beautiful resort. It was a war zone now. There were German planes flying over us. There were hundreds of thousands of refugees on the road. I mean, the Germans at that point didn't discriminate who a refugee was. They were just fleeing, and they were coming down at treetop level, my brother Sammy told me. And they were shooting us with their machine guns all along the way. Even when we crossed the French border into Calais, where there's the tunnel now that connects to England and where migrants are using to flee across the channel. That time there weren't any tunnels. There was no way to go. No ships were there to help us. So we got stuck there in Calais, and they really came down hard, those Germans. My mom told me that there were times that she had to throw me into a ditch, and she covered me with her own body. I saw a film the other day that somebody found in archives of planes coming down and the people just running down into a pit to hide from being, or to avoid being killed by the machine guns. And there were people who were killed, my brother Sammy told me. The road was filled with refugees killed by those German planes. The question is, how did that affect me? Because I didn't remember being shot at, or thing, you know. I was 3.5 years old. The only thing I remember was one time my mom throwing me into a ditch and covering me with her body. So how did all of this affect me? In the beginning, I remember a couple of years ago, I went out to dinner with my wife Carolyn, and we were sitting outside in a patio having dinner, and I heard a tremendous roar, and I was frightened. I dove under the table, and I said, Carolyn, there's a plane coming down. It's going to crash down on us. And everybody else was eating, nothing was wrong. It was a freight train passing by. And the noise of the freight train triggered something in me. And sometimes that still happens, but not as severe as that particular day. There are nightmares that I have of people coming in to my bedroom and taking me away. And I wake up screaming, and Carolyn, wakes me up. She shakes me to assure me that nothing is wrong. Imagine that almost 60, 65, 70 years later, those moments that captured my subconscious awoke the fear that I probably had when it actually happened, but I didn't remember. And those fears lasted for quite a while. I was afraid of people. I mistrusted them. When I was in high school, there was a young girl, she was beautiful. And she wanted to go out with me. And I kind of pushed her away. And it was a lonely feeling. I felt that being alone, I could protect myself from harm, but it was really lonely. And the loneliness was painful. And I needed to overcome that. And I did. I had help, but I did overcome those fears. So here I am, 78 years old, with a family of 4 sons and 5 grandchildren. But I'm sobered by the fact that 1.5 million children, they should be up here with me, celebrating, being grandparents, parents, celebrating weddings and bat mitzvahs. But they're not here. They're not here to tell their stories. 1.5 million Jewish children. It is an unbelievable burden that I carry. If there is a burden that I do carry, it's the remembrance of these children. And whenever I speak and whatever I do in terms of the Holocaust, it's in remembrance of those children. So we went on from Calais. We went down to Abbeville. You know, it was walking, it was renting a car from a farmer, buying a used car from a farmer. So we were able to travel a little bit. And the car broke down in Abbeville, the distributor broke. We couldn't get it repaired. And we walked along the road, and a truck came by and picked us up. A truck. A couple of years ago, I went on the internet to search for photographs of what it looked like, visibly, for people fleeing from the Germans in Belgium and throughout France. And there were loads of photographs. You know, photographers and newspapers were covering the war. So I came upon a truck. This truck right here. I looked at it. And what a marvelous discovery it was for me. Because my family and I were on that truck. This is my mom. Look at her. She looks like a beggar woman compared to the earlier photograph when she was all fancy, dressed up. My dad. He looks like a wise guy. He was a wise guy. He always had a cigar in his hand. Back here is my brother Leo, right here. And over here is my brother Sammy, holding me. And that's me right there. I couldn't believe that I found that. Unbelievable. I was kind of thrilled to discover that photograph. I mean, I didn't jump up with joy or anything like that, but I was thrilled to see a visual representation of what I went through. Here I am, little Freddie, in the truck, running away from the Nazis with my family. Unbelievable. A miracle, isn't it? It's a miracle. And so we continued on, and we were driven to Dieppe. And we're into around almost the third week in May, May 18, 19. Now, what happened during the period? What happened at nighttime? You know, we slept in small hotels, in barns, on the road. My father had money. He was a diamond dealer in Antwerp. And he's a shrewd guy. Less than an hour or so after the bombings occurred in Antwerp, he ran to the bank before they closed down, before they were shuttered. And he took out the money that he had, as well as took out the diamonds that were in the safe. But he also did something else. And he really had, chutzpah. He had the chutzpah to go after clients who owed him money. Yeah, he did, and he got it before they fled. That was my dad. He was a tough guy. A gambler. Joie de vivre. So we took a train then from Dieppe to Paris. And of course, it was crowded with refugees. Had to buy tickets to get on the train. I mean, it's a crazy world that we lived in at that time. In other places, later on, we had to have visas to go from one country to another country in the midst of all this terrorism that was going on, especially by the French. So we were in Paris for about a week or so, and we had heard at that time, my parents and my father, I didn't know what was happening, that Belgium and Holland and Luxembourg surrendered at the end of May. And so the Germans then came into Paris. They invaded France. And when we heard that, we fled Paris, took a train, and went all the way down to Bordeaux. And we stayed in Bordeaux until around June 19, almost 3 weeks. Stayed in a little hotel. There were thousands of Jewish refugees who were going the same route. They were sleeping in the railroad station, in parks. We found a little hotel, and we stayed in that hotel for about 3 weeks. And then we heard that the Germans were coming closer, and we had to flee again. I mean, it was, one escape after another escape. And went down to this area here, in Hendaye, in Dax, not too far, in France, but not too far away from the Spanish border. And the taxi driver told us, you're never going to get into Spain because the Germans were already, the German border guards and the French border guards and the Spanish border guards were guarding the area. Although, there were thousands of Jews who did cross into Spain. Like, mob of people rushing through, like you see on TV today, mobs of refugees who were just storming through barriers and fighting for their lives. We didn't. My mom was afraid to cross into Spain because she heard rumors that the French guards were holding back young men and conscript them into the French army, which was in disarray. And so what could we do but go east? So we were in Dax, and there was some international Red Cross buses there that helped refugees, find some places where they could stay. And they dropped us off in a town called Po. which is a beautiful city surrounded by the Pyrenees Mountains. And that was around a little bit after June 22, when France surrendered to Germany. And a new French government was then being established that became a puppet of the Nazis, the Vichy government, called Vichy because the Germans kicked them out of Paris and told them you can have your capital in Vichy. And so we were in Po, slept in a school gymnasium, the floors covered with straw so we could sleep. In the morning we had to get up because the kids were coming to school. You know, life went on, okay. Not for us, but for the others, life went on. And all we could do is roam around town. And the mayor got angry at that. I read in history books and I was told by my two brothers. And so one morning, near the end of June, the French police stormed into the school in the morning and ordered us out, ordered us to board some school buses, and we didn't know where we were going to go. And they said to us, my brother Sammy or Leo told me, that they were going to take us to some nice villages where we could rest up and straighten out and be on our way. It was a ruse. They took us to an internment camp. And this is the internment camp right here. It's in Gurs, G-U-R-S. It was built by Spanish refugees, and there were a lot of Spanish refugees in the camp when we got there, left over from the Spanish Civil War. When they lost a lot of revolutionaries, they crossed into France after Franco took power. And they were forced by the French to build these barracks so they could stay in there. And they could hold 10,000 prisoners. After a while, slowly, the Spaniards were released from the camp, and it became an imprisonment to hold Jews. And there were about 5,000 or 6,000 Jews in that camp already in June of 1940. And more came in. The Nazis sent deported Jews from the Rhineland, and they were deported to Gurs. And it was a terrible camp. It was rainy season, it was muddy. We slept on straw beds or on the floor. I couldn't go out to pee at night. I remember had to pee, and I peed in my own bed. And the place was crowded with women and children. We were separated. The women and the children were separated by this alleyway from, the men and the boys who were with their fathers. And I remember peeing on my bed, and there was no room for me to move around someplace else. So I laid down in this wet, soggy straw. 3.5 years old. Why? Why did I deserve that? Why did anybody deserve that? They didn't like us. The French were just as bad as the Nazis. Let me tell you that. They were just as bad. The French deported over 75,000 Jews to the extermination camps, starting with the roundups in 1942. So we were in this camp maybe 2 or 3 weeks. That's because my brother Sammy, 16 years old, he escaped from the camp. He told the guard, and the camp was ringed with barbed wires and difficult to get out. But there was a period when there was a lot of upheaval in the French government. They didn't know what to do with themselves. And there was a period where, people who had the guts to do it would escape from the camp. My brother escaped, hitchhiked into town, a nearby town, ran into a mayor, a little village in Oran, right around here, not too far away from the camp. Here is Gers. And the village mayor was very nice to him and said, I can't do anything for you, but if you go to Po, back to Po, you can talk to a French official higher up than the mayor, who was in charge of the region there, the small region, and maybe he can help you out. So Sammy hitchhiked into Po, and he walked into this guy's office, all right? And he said, my parents are in this camp. We didn't do anything. There was no reason. And the official, he took pity on him. That's what Sammy said. And he wrote, and he signed some documents for Sammy to take back, give it over to the commander of the camp, ordering the commander to release us. So Sammy returned, hitchhiked a ride from two French officers who were themselves fleeing from the scene of war. Went to the commander, showed those documents called laissez-passer, release documents. And lo and behold, we were freed, the whole family. If it hadn't been for Sammy, I wouldn't be here today, because a couple of months later, a French Holocaust scholar told me we would not have been able to escape at all, because then the French government really became entrenched, passed laws, make it difficult for the Jews to escape, ordering the police carte blanche to arrest anybody who looked like a Jew, French citizens who were Jewish. Their properties were confiscated. They were fired from their positions. They couldn't practice medicine, law. They were fired from the universities. Teachers were fired. And it became, started to become a hopeless situation. And what happened was they just roamed around. They didn't know what to do. And so right in this area right here, the French put up more internment camps. One of them was called Les Milles, M-I-L-L-E-S, which held thousands of Jews. So we were trapped. Didn't know what to do. We were in Marseille when all these laws were passed. My father tried to see whether he could go to the port and pay some money to get on a ship to come to go to, that was going to Cuba or something like that. But he was afraid to really close the deal because he was scared that they were going to bamboozle him, at the port, at the seaport. I mean, he carried diamonds with him and money. So he didn't want to risk that. Didn't want to risk being frisked and robbed. So we then took a train from Marseille and we went to Nice in the French Riviera. I tell you, it became my home. We lived in a nice little hotel. It wasn't that little. But we were protected by the Italians who controlled that area. when France surrendered to Germany, Mussolini decided that he wanted a piece of the action, so his troops invaded the French Riviera and began to administer that area. And it became a safe haven for tens of thousands of Jews who heard that that area was safe, that the Italians were helping the Jews, they were kind to us. They warned us whenever there was trouble with the French police, coming into the hotel, asking questions of the Italians. We were told to stay in our rooms. And one time, Nazi officials came into the hotel. And I looked out the window, and we were told to go back. We were downstairs. I was playing around with my friend, and we were told to go back to our rooms by the Italians. And my mother and I were alone at the hotel. My father, he was probably off gambling, and my two older brothers, they were probably fooling around someplace. And she got scared. We hid in a closet for hours. I nudged her. I said, I want to go out. And I saw these Germans from around the 4th or 5th floor looking down at them. And they looked so strong with their uniforms and their black boots. And being a kid, I said to myself, gosh, I would like to be like that. Strong. I didn't know. All right, I didn't know. So finally, they left. But that moment on, I became scared. From that moment on. That was in early 1942. And I watched my step. Didn't go out of the hotel, didn't wander off the grounds. I was told not to. And I felt that tremendous fear from my mother. Oh my gosh. She was scared for her life and for the life of her children. So, the last few months in Nice were horrible. 1942, the roundups began all over France. Even in the north, where the Nazis administered the area, it was the French police that conducted the roundups, because there weren't enough Nazi officers to do it all by themselves. And so they started emptying the internment camps first. There were 4,000 Jews in Gers. They were all deported to Auschwitz in the beginning of August 42. The Germans ordered the French to round up at least 10,000 Jews for the month of August in the southern part of France. And the French argued with the Germans. I said, that would have to include children. And the Germans, for some reason, said, no, we don't want the children. Just go after the elderly people, people who didn't have children. And the French argued back and forth. No, we need to come close to the quota, and we have to take the children. And finally, the Nazis relented. Okay, you can take the children too. And who gave the order finally? Eichmann gave the order. They were ruthless, the French. No wonder there's so much anti-Semitism in France today. They didn't care for Jews. I mean, marching down the Champs-Élysées in the 21st century, again, ordering the Jews to get out of France and warning them if they didn't, they would go back into the ovens. What kind of a world are we living in today? The kosher store was shut up by the terrorists a few months ago. So we were afraid. We didn't know what to do. We were trapped. How could we save ourselves during the roundups? There was an order to round up the Jewish people who lived in the district where we were in on a certain date, which was August the 26th. And I discovered some documents that really showed how brutal the French were. On August 18 of 42, the Vichy government instructed a regional police in the area where we lived and around that area, the roundup to begin on the 26th of August. And the memorandum said, please keep the state strictly secret. 5 days later, on the 23rd, the headquarters of the Nice police issued a set of one-line instructions to its officers, leading with this order. Again, the operation must be kept secret to the end. Verify the addresses, which meant that they would use the census where Jewish people had to register their names and where they lived. And so they had a list of thousands of Jews knowing where they lived in Nice and around the area. Make lists by localities and neighborhoods. And then the Nice headquarters ordered all the police to participate, and that the raids be done simultaneously and as quickly as possible. Instructions: railway station for loading freight trains, straw, buckets for water, toilet buckets, 2 guards per rail car. And then the final command: don't neglect anything. Think of everything ahead so that the operation will be done completely, as fast and humanely as possible. Humanely. That word was uttered by a candidate recently who said that if I become president, I am going to order the deportation of all the 11 million illegal immigrants who live here. But he said, we'll do it humanely. You know who I mean. And then on the 24th of August, the Vichy government sent another message insisting that the raids be done on the 26th of August. And they told the police regions, it's up to you to fix the starting hour of this operation to the time that suits you best. I would suggest, and this came from the Interior Ministry, I would suggest strongly, however, to start in the very early morning preferably between 4 and 5 a.m. We knew nothing about it. The day before, a distant relative of my father, a young man who came running into the hotel, and he told us we had to leave right away because the hotel was going to be raided the next morning. And my father asked him, well, how do you know that? And he told him that a policeman told him that that's what's going to happen. So here was this one policeman who had the moral courage to stand up and to at least save some Jewish families. What courage that took. And didn't know his name, but the policeman was a friend of this young man. So he told him what was going to happen. So as a result, a number of the Gross families, and there were a few other Grosses in the area, they were saved. We hid out. One family hid out in the forest. Our family, we were hidden by an Italian Catholic whom my father knew from his days going to the casino with him, to gamble, okay? Called him up and said, could you please hide us out? He came over right away with his automobile. We left everything behind, except for one thing that I wanted to take with me, my bike. Show you some pictures. Here's my bike. My brother Leo teaching me how to ride it at the hotel. And there were other photographs. Here is another photograph of me and my friend, Mickey Abet. Mickey Abet lived with his mother at the hotel. They originally were Turkish royalty. They came from Turkey. And they were Muslims. So my first best friend was a Muslim. I desperately tried to find him years later, but I couldn't. And it's a shame. Maybe if we got together, we could solve the problem, you know. And here's again Leo with me. Leo was my protector. He was with me all the time. He protected me. My mom was an emotional wreck for many years before. And that was taken in 1941. There was food rationing going on at the time. We hardly had anything to eat. I existed mainly on eating tangerine. And that's why I so love them today. I go to Costco and buy a barrel of tangerines. Yeah, look at my mom and dad, picture taken around the same time. Street photographers. Look how skinny they are. Look at my dad. And look at Sammy. He was 17 years old only, and he looks like he's 35. His teeth were rotting because of malnutrition. So we stayed with that Catholic family for about 6 weeks. Sammy left earlier in April of '46 to go to and escape to Portugal. At that time, the French police were arresting young men to send them to the slave labor camps in Poland. The Nazis needed labor, young men to work in the factories and build their war machines. So Sammy escaped. This is the way he escaped. He had to get 3 visas. one visa to leave France, a transit visa to go through Spain, and an entrance visa to go to Portugal, enter Portugal. And he went to get the French visa. My father somehow knew a French official who was working in Vichy. And so he gave my brother Sammy an envelope with money in it. So Sammy, 18 at the time, he took a train to Vichy, met the official, bribed him for a French visa. There must have been a lot of money in there. Maybe even diamonds, who knew? But my dad was streetwise. He knew he was an operator, and he was responsible for saving our lives at that point. Sammy's life especially. So Sammy went back to Nice. He had to go to 2 other villages to get the other 2 visas. And by the time he got all 3 visas, the Portuguese visa expired. Expires after 30 days. So my dad said, go anyway. And he went to Pau, took a train to Pau. He was all dressed up. He spoke French fluently. I mean, he was French. So nobody bothered him on the train. So he got to Pau and went to the Portuguese consul, asking him to extend the visa. And the Portuguese consul told him, they're looking for you. And to this day, Sammy doesn't know who it was. Nobody knows. So he did get an extension so he could go into Portugal and stayed there until the end of the war by himself. We were hiding out for 6 weeks, and during those 6 weeks, Leo and I lived with the family, and my mother and father were downstairs hiding in the basement all that time. I came down one time, and it was a beautiful day, the sun was out, but the curtain was drawn. So I jumped on the bed, and I opened up the curtain. My father came to me and said, oh no, don't do that. And he closed the curtain. Now I know why he did that. When the police were searching for people, they looked everywhere. So they were hiding there for 6 weeks. And then the family became afraid that somebody would tell on them that they were hiding a Jewish family. And so we had to leave. I mean, this was our life, going from one place to another place. And we were tired of it. I was tired of it. 4, 5 years old, almost 6 years old, when we had to leave that family. And my mother was just, I don't know, she was, somehow she gained strength. I don't know where it came from. But she had to go out during the roundups. The roundups were still occurring. She had to go out and get some false passport. So she had to go out and meet the forger at a certain place. And she did that and went in the morning. She got all dressed up, I remember, and she looked beautiful. She really did. She looked like she was going to work. And of course, that's what she wanted people to believe, who saw her. So she took the tram and met the forger and stayed with him a number of hours and then came back early evening. And she was exhausted from fear. But she made it through. You know, people gain strength during times when they needed it, especially during times of severe trouble. Somehow, my mother, she was able to do that, because she was always afraid. And my dad, I remember he gave her a hug when she came back. It was nice, a nice feeling. But we had to leave. So the Catholic man drove us to the train station. We had nothing at all, except for my bicycle. I wanted to take my bike with me. So we went to the train station in Nice, boarded the train, and as I was boarding, a French policeman came and just tugged it away from me, the bike. What can I tell you? I was disappointed. But I knew what was going on. I saw people at the train station crying. You know, there were other Jews who were leaving. I saw a man in tears, and I was wondering why. And my brother Leo, he told me, you know, we're going on this train. We don't know what is waiting for us at the next stop. The Nazis, the French police. But we had to gamble, you know. We gambled in our lives. So we took the train from Grenoble to a French alpine village near Geneva. We got off there at the train station, and as we were walking out, two French policemen suddenly appeared. Now, when we were on the train, my brother Leo and I were in one car, and my mother and father were in another car. We were accompanied by my dad's twin brother, but not identical, who was a French citizen. And so when they stopped him and us, you know, he showed that he was in the French army. So he was, you know, he said, okay, go ahead. And so we went on. And then they stopped my mom and dad and looked at their passports. And my dad told my mom, don't say anything, because she didn't speak French well. But he did. And they looked at the passport, and suddenly they started running after us. And the two policemen asked my uncle, do you know these people? And he said, no, I don't know them. Well, their name is Gross. Your name is Gross. The forger listed my mother's name, maiden name, as Gross. I don't know why he did that, but that could have turned out into a fatal mistake. So when he said no, they left us and they were looking for my mom and dad. Well, my mom and dad saw what was going on, and they ran into a bar. And the police were looking for them, but they couldn't find them. And they had a couple of beers there. The farmers, you know, helped them out because they knew what was going on. And people in the street, you know, people who lived there knew what was happening. It was a pathway used by Jews to get close to the Swiss border. So We went middle of the night, got close to the Swiss border, and we were stopped by the border guards. And the border guard told us that he wouldn't allow anybody in, except for those who had relatives living in Switzerland. And there were a number of other Jews with us. My mother's mother lived in Switzerland. And when she told the border guard that, we were let in to the Swiss, allowed into Switzerland, but not before, and taken to a little way station, not before the police called the police in the town where my grandmother lived to verify that my mother was telling the truth. She was. This is my mom, the girl, teenager, and my grandmother, a young woman at the time. She was a widow. And they lived after World War I in Germany. Just her and her daughter. My mom's dad passed away when she was 9 years old from tuberculosis. So she met a Swiss traveling salesman, my grandmother, and he fell in love with her, and he wanted to marry her. And he said, "Come with me to Switzerland." But he threw out a boner. "You can't take your daughter with you." So what do you think what her mother did? It was awful. She put her in an orphanage at a time when a young lady needed a mother. She was growing up. She needed some assistance. Abandoned her. I never knew that until after my mother died, when her little granddaughter, Sammy's daughter, told me the truth. She confided in her granddaughter. So I began to understand my mother better, how sad she was all the time. She was not a joy to be with, unfortunately. And she was very reserved. When I hugged her, she stiffened up. It was unbelievable. And so, I think it was about 25 years later, this woman gets her redemption, all right? When my mother said, "Yes, my mother lives in Switzerland," and allowed us in. So we were first put in a displaced persons camp. My mom and my two brothers in one camp, and my father was in another camp. And they were there until around November of 1943, and they were freed from the camp. Germany was losing the war. It was inevitable, and the Swiss knew it. So they made a decision to free Jews. They didn't want them anymore, so they freed them. And but I didn't stay with, Leo and I were not with my mother for very long in the camp. 3 months after we arrived, the Jewish service agencies came in and asked the mothers whether would part with their children so they can live with foster families and go to school and live a normal life, etc. Leo lived with a family in one town, and nice family. I had met them, and he became friends with a son that was his age, and they became lifelong friends. I lived with a family that had a son about 9 or 10 years old. I was afraid of him. He abused me. He beat me up. And at one point, it was awful. I don't want to go into detail, but it was a horrible experience. I didn't tell anybody but Leo later. And so I thought I was free. And here I'm being harmed again. No wonder I was afraid of people, afraid to be around people. Sometimes even not trusting members of my family. My mother always used to say to me, "Don't trust anybody. Don't trust anybody." And I was wondering why she said that all the time. And somebody said to me, "Well, you know, when you visited your mother, well, she was freed, and you were with her for a night, and then you had to go back, and you pleaded with her, 'Can I stay with you?' And she didn't want me to stay. She said, 'No, you have to go back to Zangallen, where I lived with a foster family.' And I was, kind of told that, here your mother had a chance to get close to you, and she abandoned you for that period. She didn't want to be bothered by you. And I was hurt by that. I was really hurt. Maybe that's why she never told me what happened to her. But I came through, a lot of work I had to do in years later to come through and become a normal person. This is a document from the Holocaust Museum that lists people who crossed into Switzerland. And my name, my brother Leo's name is on there, as well as my dad and my mom. They all kept records, meticulous records. Why? Why? Did they want to build a museum, and show off what they did to the Jewish people? And this is a concentration, no, displaced persons camp that we were in. This is me, and that's my brother Leo. And here I am with schoolmates in the town that I lived with my foster family, and this kid is me. Not too happy, not too happy. I had a rough time. The next photograph, after I was rejoined with my family in around February of 1944, and we all lived with my grandmother. How about that? And my grandmother hated my father. And she tried to convince my mom to divorce him. She wanted her by herself. She felt guilty abandoning her. Here she is. She didn't want to come into America with us, and so she was left behind. My mom, me, my dad, and Leo. Here I am back in Antwerp in March of 1946, 9 years old. And here I am on an American military freighter, Liberty ship, coming to America. Big smile on my face. And came to America, went to school, went to New York University, majored in journalism, became a reporter, got married, got divorced, got married again. And these are my 4 sons. Adam, 45, Josh, 40, and Mark, 43, from my previous marriage. And this is Jonathan, 27 years old, from my second marriage. Adam works on Wall Street, and he's pretty well off. Josh is Director of Communications for the Smithsonian Channel. Mark is just got his real estate license in California. For many years, he was a bartender, and a good one, too. Jonathan has another story. Jonathan, he works for the Food Network as a program coordinator. That's when they're in town in Louisville. They're all come from LA to shoot a series, a cooking series that features a young woman from Louisville. So he works maybe 3 times a year. And he, okay. But he makes good money there. But his passion, he wants to be a hip-hop artist, a rapper. And he has a good body of work, but it's a tough business, really tough. And you can look him up on the web, but be careful. He goes by the name of Johnny Spanish. How did he get that name? Well, he became infatuated with Jewish gangsters. And he read a few books about Jewish gangsters. And one of them his name was, Benny Cohen, but he took the name of Johnny Spanish. And he was partnering with another Jewish guy. But the mistake that Johnny Spanish made was he tried to steal this partner's girlfriend. And he got it. He got whacked. Johnny Spanish. He's a good kid. He really is. He has been helping us. He lived in New York for about 4 years and came back. My wife became quite ill. And I couldn't handle it really after a while all by myself. So he came home to help me out. He's very concerned about me. And we're in love. All 3 of us are in love with each other. Celebrated a few days ago our 30th wedding anniversary. Nice. Okay, the next photograph is of my grandchildren. Ashley, the little one, 10 years old. Haley, she had her bat mitzvah in 2013. She's almost 15 years old. And Dylan, she's 12, and she's going to have her bat mitzvah in January. Okay? What a gift, huh? What a gift. Imagine if those 1.5 million children were alive today, they would have had the same experience. A lot was lost. The next picture is of Joshua's sons, little Miles, who's 3 years old, and Gabriel is 6, and he just started first grade a few days ago. You all went to the Holocaust Museum, a lot of people, I'm sure. And you know about these shoes that were assembled there. We are the shoes. We are the last witnesses. We are shoes from grandchildren and grandparents from Prague, Paris, and Amsterdam. And because we are only made of fabric and leather and not of blood and flesh, each of us avoided the hellfire. Now, these are my shoes. I had never shown my shoes until a few months ago to some 8th graders in Louisville. And I was asked to do a little reflection on how it felt for me to show these shoes. And I did. As I took out those little shoes from the tiny plastic bag, it just hit me how much my mama loved me. To save these shoes throughout our turbulent years running from the Nazis. I was so proud of her that moment, but yet a bit apprehensive to share these shoes with students. Would she want me to share them with others? She was so secretive. How would the students react? Silly laughter? Not at all. I felt they understood the meaning of that moment, especially when I showed a photo of hundreds of shoes belonging to men, women, and children who were exterminated. All of these shoes lovingly assembled so they touched each other. To keep warm, to remember who they lost, still looking so lonely. And here I am with my baby shoes, warmed by the touch of my hand, by the touch of students' hands, saved, alive, held by someone alive. The owner of these shoes, me. Thank you.